Okay, now we're moving on to the topic of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is going to be something that plants, animals, fungi, any type of animal or species is most likely going to go through the process of cellular respiration in order to make energy for itself. And some people say this is really difficult, kind of like photosynthesis, but I will tell you this process is extremely important if you're interested in any medical field or if you ever need to someday have some kind of medical issue where you're taking medications. Usually it all goes back to this process of cellular respiration. When we're talking cellular respiration, we're also going to look at diagrams that go with it, just like we did for photosynthesis. And there's going to be three main steps that are going to go with this. There's glycolysis, which is over here, and that's going to be outside of the mitochondria. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Citric acid cycle, and then the last one's going to be the electron transport chain. We will be focusing on each one of these steps, but we're going to kind of split them up as well so you can kind of learn a little bit about them separately. For cellular respiration, you need a few things. The first thing you need is sugar. So we know that the plant made its own sugar so it can go through cellular respiration. But also, humans are going to eat other things. And so it could be larger macromolecules. You're going to need to break it down into the simple sugar of glucose. You're also going to need to breathe in oxygen. And this is where this comes into play a lot with athletes. If you're not getting enough oxygen in, it's really hard to go through this process of feeding your cells. And you need to feed your cells in order to survive. The byproducts are going to be CO2, which you breathe out as a human, water, which is going to be something that your cells are going to have as in excess water, and you're going to excrete that. And then you're going to have this thing called ATP, which is the energy that your cells need in order to survive, to be able to do functions like move. And those are going to be, we call this a chemical energy source. So I'm going to real quick put these each on here, sugar and oxygen into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about this process of oxygen or no oxygen being present and what that means in terms of fermentation. When we're talking fermentation, we are talking that process where you may end up with lactic acid in your muscles, which means that you're going to have a more tough time moving, especially after maybe an athletic event where you worked really hard. You ran for a really long time in cross country. And after maybe the meet, you're feeling that really soreness. It's really hard to even sit down in class. It's hard to be able to move those muscles. And so that's going to be the process of your body going through fermentation, not having enough oxygen. You can also go through the process of fermentation to make things like cheese, different types of alcohol. It's going to be making yogurt. We go through fermentation for a lot of different processes to be able to make different types of alcohols in the end, and we'll look at those next. So, when we're looking at this here, we know that fermentation and cellular respiration use this glucose or this sugar to be able to break down into different things. And so, we can either go from glucose and go through the process of glycolysis. Every single thing is going to at least go through glycolysis, the first step of cellular respiration. But what happens next is going to depend on if oxygen or no oxygen is present. And so anaerobic respiration is when we go from glycolysis to pyruvate and we stop there. There's no oxygen present, so we call that anaerobic respiration. And so if we just do that, we get to pyruvate. But if we have oxygen present, we can actually move our pyruvate into the Krebs cycle and then go through the electron transport chain, and we get to make 36 ATP, which is a whole ton. If not, we only make 2 ATP here. And so that pyruvate, though, can go through the process of fermentation, and its byproducts are going to be lactic acid or ethanol, which is going to be our two byproducts that we could have. So cellular respiration and fermentation um, happen in all forms of life. But cellular respiration and fermentation are going to take that glucose and it's going to make pyruvate. But like I said, depending on if there's sugar or not, we can go through the process of the Krebs cycle. If not sugar, sorry, oxygen or not, we can go through the process of the Krebs cycle. If no oxygen, we can go through the process of fermentation. And like I said, fermentation and anaerobic respiration are not the same process. This here is anaerobic respiration. If we go into fermentation, that can happen. No oxygen's present, we go through fermentation, or we can go into the Krebs cycle. Okay, cellular respiration eukaryotes is going to need some different macromolecules for this to happen. So we're going to look at this first. And so, like I said, we're going to see that there's three steps. Glycolysis here, we see our arrow here. We're going to see the Krebs cycle here, and then we're going to see the electron transport chain here. And so ATP is going to be used by cells to do biological work. Our goal is to make ATP so we can do biological work. And cellular respiration involves the release of chemical energy through breaking down glucose to create ATP. We can't just use glucose. That sugar that you take in is useless to your cells unless it turns into ATP. And so cellular respiration has different pathways, and where they occur is really important that you write down in your notes and you have it down. Glycolysis is going to happen in the cytoplasm. Pyruvate oxidation, and we'll talk more about what oxidation is in a little bit, is going to occur in the mitochondria. We're going to see that the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, whichever one that you're going to call it, is going to occur in the mitochondria. And the electron transport chain is going to also occur in the mitochondria as well. And we're going to stop there and come back in just a little bit on each step separately. And we'll focus next on the electron transport chain, which will be the last step. So we're going to focus on each one of these steps. We talked a lot about glycolysis so far. So I just want to recap. Glycolysis is going to occur in the cytoplasm of the cell. If there is no oxygen present, we are going to see that that pyruvate can go through the process of fermentation, and your byproducts could be lactic acid or ethanol. If we do have oxygen present, that pyruvate from the anaerobic process, which made 2 ATP, can go into our Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, which can then go to our electron transport chain and in the end create 36 ATP. We are going to stop there for our first video, and when you're ready, we'll focus in on the electron transport chain next.